We're at a meeting.
Is really up to the pleasure of the board. Clarence won't mind if we get started.
What does he say, about like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or?
But you don't have anything to vote on, so you can.
And that was at but she was not sure.
Hey, Tanya, just in case you wanted to text John, because I saw him at the office. You hear that, Dr. Pace? Frank said since we're not voting on anything, technically we get started with 2. And it's not a quorum, but it's careful.
We are ready.
Okay, well, thank you, school board, Superintendent Pace. It's great to be here today. We have a lot to cover, so we're going to keep this moving quickly. We're going to provide 2 major updates today. the Gateway High School Comprehensive Renovation Project update, and the Elementary A Celebration Island Village project update as well. But before we move in to the actual Gateway Comprehensive Renovation Project, Dr. Pace asked that we give you a quick update on the connector road. And this is a topic that you've heard about before. It is not per se part of the Gateway High School project. However, previous direction from the board was to collaborate and coordinate our efforts with Osceola County. This is a proposed Osceola County project. There is nothing in their CIP at this time, but we were directed to provide provisions in our design for Gateway High School. So that's what we've done, and I'm going to provide a few introductions before I get too deep into this. So to my left is my Director of Design and Construction, Mark Lockhart. Our project manager for the Gateway High School project, Mike Suarez. And with us at the table, we also have Andrew Libby, who is the Senior Project Manager, and Jessica Roddenberry, who is the Director of Design. Both Andrew and Jessica are with BRPH. Also with BRPH today, we have Francisco Alvarez, VP Project Executive, in the audience. With Cardinal, our construction manager, who has been working very closely with us through the design development. We have Mr. Richard Rodriguez, Vice President, and Jason Krakunas, Project Executive. Also from the school district, we have our proud principal of Gateway High School, Principal Law, with us. We also have Mike McFarland, our Senior Facility Manager Design, and Jonathan Romberg, our MEP Coordinator. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our project manager, Mike, to talk a little bit further about the connector road.
Okay. So the connector road on the south side of the property, while not, like you said, not part of the project, it is something that we are studying to understand what the impacts will be. On the screen, you can kind of show a rough approximation of the design that has been worked out with Mr. McFarland and the planning group. On the next slide, we will kind of go through a quick zoom in. There is quite a lot on that slide, but I'll just hit some of the high notes for you. The most obvious one is, of course, with an additional road, we have an additional pedestrian crossing that will need to be coordinated and managed. We will also lose a bit of property, which currently has the Vandal Watch building. We would have to remove the existing vehicle gate that blocks off the current staff parking and is part of the hard barrier for the campus.
And keep in mind, Board, that the Vandal Watches, that is a component that we are slowly phasing out in our school district.
Yep. Towards the middle at the parking area itself, we would have a reduction in staff parking, and there would be conflicts when it comes to the setbacks from the road for the Global Leadership Academy and the staff parking that would have to either be managed or a barrier of some sort. Moving on, at the sports side of things, there would be a narrow clash with the ball field, which would require either a very creative fence or most likely a small shift in the ball park. So with that, we'll move more into the proper project meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Great update. So now we'll move into the comprehensive renovation project update. We're going to provide a project design progression update. We're going to share some exterior elevations, revisit our project objectives to look at our baseline schedule and our enhanced scope items that have since come to surface. So, but first, I'd like to bring you down memory lane. This is our 5th facilities workshop on the Gateway High School project. Our first one was on June 18, 2019, where we specifically talked about the Castaldi process. 2 subsequent workshops in June of 2020, where we provided the update on the Castaldi and our path moving forward with the Gateway High School comprehensive renovation. So a comprehensive renovation is not a replacement. It's a project that moves forward with surgical precision, where that you provide a Castaldi report to the DOE to determine which buildings you're allowed to raise and replace. When we completed that exercise, there were 6.5 buildings that were approved by the DOE. We requested 8.5. And those 2 buildings are outlined in red, which we'll talk about further in slide 15. So the caution note, caution, proceed with caution. And this was to remind all of us that on the existing buildings, we wanted to minimize the renovations so that we would not reset the Castaldi clock. Because according to DOE, when you make a substantial investment, anything above and beyond maintenance, it now tips the threshold for the Castaldi process. Though, our school district may look at going back at Gateway in 5, 10, 15 years from now, and a lot of us will probably be retired, but that is not the legacy that we want to leave for the school district. We want to have the school district to have the ability to do things in the future at Gateway that would not impede their ability to do so. So we limited the renovations for that reason to fire alarm, telecommunications, painting, roof repairs, FF&E, technology, and minor space reconfiguration. Okay, now we will move into the design progression, and I'll turn the presentation over to Jessica.
Hello, everybody. You guys may recall we were here in April, and Andrew and I proudly presented the image that you see on your screen, which was a result of our intensive programming effort with all of the different stakeholder groups. We were given a lot of access to your groups, over 30, and then you guys can see that group right off to the right-hand side. So we got a ton of input about best practices, where your district is going. We asked everybody to think today and be really future forward with what their needs are. And we were able to take what was a projected 180,000 square foot 3-story program down to 155,000 square foot 1-story program and really hone in on some great programming. Next slide, please. The great news is, as we have progressed past programming through what we call schematic design, which is about 30% completion, and then we just recently submitted 60% design a couple of weeks ago, we are still sitting right around that 155,000 square foot footprint, which means all of that time that we spent with the stakeholder groups has really paid off, and that program has held true as we've continued to develop the building. You guys can see some images right off to the right, which are really us just taking that program and that design and starting to build out with all of the input that we've gotten from those stakeholder groups and from your district leadership on where you guys are going as a district, whether that's technology or your curriculum programs in that way, and been able to incorporate all of the other considerations for this project, whether they be high performance or this is going to have an EHPA, an enhanced hurricane protection area to support your community as well. So that's where we are in the progress on that one. One of the ways that we are able to be so efficient with our programming is we do have an advantage to take on some of these existing buildings. While we don't want to reset the Castaldi on these buildings, if you will, Building 7, which is currently the media center, actually offered a really great opportunity for us to incorporate new CTE labs in classrooms, as well as build out the JROTC program to become even more robust. We know that it's nationally recognized, and we wanted to make sure we continue to give the space to those students to excel in those programs, even being able to include a qual shooting range in Building 7. So what was a great media center is now being transformed into a state-of-the-art facility for those programs as well, using the existing building and footprint and doing the most with the least on that.
Now we just have to change the ROTC program from the Marines to the Army. And
Oh no!
Air Force.
Be fighting words.
So I'm actually going to turn this over to Andrew, who's going to give you guys a little bit more input on where we've gone and where we're going.
Great, thank you, Jessica. So on the slide here, as Jessica mentioned earlier, last we met was in April, and that was when we were just concluding and presenting all of the different stakeholders that we met with. We had dozens of meetings to accomplish that, and that occurred within that bar that you can see on the screen that says in design and programming. That took an investment of some additional time to make sure we got it right. But as Jessica's pointed out, we really saw it pay dividends because on the schematic design, 30%, versus what we've recently delivered, the 60% design development package, we found that a lot of the discussions and early programming validation pieces were validated through the course of our further design. So as we continue forward, the bars in blue indicate the baseline durations of our schedule. And so like I mentioned, we've just submitted our design development package, and we're here today on the 5th with the workshop. We are presently in a period right now where we're gaining feedback from stakeholders, from the facilities team, from you, to make sure that we understand our path forward. And then you can see at the bottom our next steps, which would be to issue the full design drawings to then go for permitting and pricing and support with the construction management team. So with that, we've got two main areas of interest that we wanted to discuss with this board today relating to this design development period to make sure we know where we're headed and some of our next steps. With that, I'll turn it back to Jessica.
So on that note, trying to get some feedback from you guys, we thought it would be fun to engage you a little bit in an exterior conversation. As you know, we do have existing buildings and we have new building, and it's incredibly important for us that although we do not want to restart the Castaldi and we want to make really smart investments in those existing buildings, a lot of the existing buildings do have some stucco damage and some exterior envelope opportunities for us to repair, and in doing so we get to paint them. So we are trying to move forward with exteriors that create all campus cohesion for what we're doing. Whether it's a new building or an older existing building, we want students to feel like everything is new. And so we are in some instances going to be adjacent to relatively new construction, which you can see in the upper left-hand corner. And then in the right-hand corner, we have a portion of building 2, which is the dining area that we're actually physically attaching to. It's a portion to remain, so we need to tie in and be respectful of that. We also have a potential to reuse proudly the 30-foot panther that adorns the auditorium wall that is slated for construction. So an interest to do that, and if not, we're not able to do that. Certainly having a front door and a school campus that demonstrates school pride and all of the passion that that community has for these students and faculty has been really important to us. We also have another consideration in that the Global Leadership Academy uses masonry, as does Heritage Park across the street, where some of the buildings are concrete. So we've really been looking at this as a way where we could pull all of those things together. And then in listening to maintenance, darker colors aren't the best colors on the outside when you live in Florida. They fade, so we've been looking at ways that we can be really smart, that we can pull those colors in and demonstrate the school pride without putting a burden back onto your teams to maintain those in the long run. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, which appears to already be up, we have an opportunity here where we've taken all of those considerations and we've created 2 exterior schemes that we just like both of them and we can't decide, so we wanted to get your input. Both of them provide a new front door to Gateway High School. So that new building sitting up in the front is going to host all of your public spaces and be secure. So you've got your gym spaces, your auditorium, your media center, your new administration, things like that, what projects back out to the street on that side. So in the very first option, we've got a really vibrant palette that's got some geometric shapes that pull from the plans of some of the existing buildings to remain on that, while also looking at where we could tie into the color palette of the existing buildings. And you can see the panther on that top one that we're hoping to reuse. And then in the second option below, what we've done is incorporate some stronger use of masonry. And then in this one, we honed in on those public areas where you see that cafeteria, that front administration area, and that gymnasium. We're looking at creative ways that we can bring the red and black into this program while creating a palette that allows us to bring other brighter colors that are indicative of Florida. So at this time, our 60% reflects our indecision and is a meld of both of those concepts. But if there's one of these that you guys are really inclined to see us move forward with, we'd be happy to hear all of your comments and take that into consideration.
Yeah, if I can, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, if I can, before I forget later. Yeah, I do like the bottom one because you could see the letters better, like just looking at it from a distance, like the administration, you see that right away. But I do like the panther on the top, you know, so I kind of like wish I could take the bottom, but bring the panther down.
Oh, by all means,
You can do that.
we can mix and match any elements that you like from one or the other. These are just kind of,
Yeah, but I like the bold,
Palette
because
that you
just
put.
the bold, because the top one, if you look in the middle, the administration's kind of like hidden in the back. And that's really when we want your eyes to see more than anything, because when people visit the campus, they don't need to be visiting the cafeteria unless they have to go there for like a special event. But most people, the administration has to be the easiest thing to see. And when I go down to the bottom, that does, so people, for security purposes, know they go straight to there, that's what they have to report in.
And right now, we did take into that consideration on the top image. Your eye is perfect because we did show 18-inch signage on the top one and 24-inch signage on the bottom one, just to show that distance. And you're correct, having even that 6-inch difference makes it really clear where you're supposed to go, where building signage is, just so that if somebody needs to come, you know exactly where you're going on building 1 and 2. And obviously, from safety, you want people to arrive and know exactly where they're going and not wandering around the campus. So you're absolutely correct in us kind of looking at different strategies of wayfinding on those and being able to merge them together.
I agree with Julius. I wouldn't put much faith in anything I say because my eye's not good. But I like the whole top. The lettering of Gateway High School at the top better than the lettering of Gateway High School on the bottom.
Okay.
Yeah, I like the architecture of option 1, and I like the signage, or, you know, those red signs, so from the bottom, you know, so option 2 signage, option 1 facade with the panther, with retaining that panther for possible.
Okay,
And the Gateway High School, like the chairman said, because Gateway stands out by itself, and then high school, on the bottom one, the high school, the H is like,
I like this
the
one.
left part is like hanging down, I thought it's like too cute, you know what I mean? It's like- I mean, don't get me wrong, I like it, I mean that as a constructive criticism, but I prefer Gateway than high school, and kind of like what the chairman said, the Panther and the Gateway High School lettering, or even like Mr. Arguello, the whole facade of option 1, just option 2, only the lettering and like because it looks like just not the lettering, but it looks like, what do you call those things?
Font.
The water,
Eagles.
the awnings or whatever you wanna call that?
Right.
Because they're not exactly, but that part are from the bottom.
Yeah, they pop a little bit differently on that bottom one. The great news is we must have read your mind because that's a lot of what we did for 60%, so thank you.
Okay, thank you for that input. So what we're hearing is option 1 with the option 2, a larger lettering, the 24-inch, with the gable facades on the entry points. And the gator, or the
Panther.
panther, excuse me.
Careful, Mr. Clinch.
I'm good with
My
the
apologies. All right, we'll now move into our project objectives revisited, and we'll turn it over to Mr. Lockhart.
Yes, good afternoon, board members, Dr. Pace. You, again, we've got some new faces here that weren't around the first couple of presentations that we did, so we thought it was important to kind of bring everybody together and to where we are today. Again, as Mr. Clinch mentioned already, the initial intent was to really focus on those new spaces. When we established the budget, we didn't know how successful we would be with Castaldi, so we had to make a lot of educated guesses at the time. But we knew we were going to focus in on the new construction that was going to replace those buildings that we were hoping to be able to take down and improve. Like the performing arts, that's just way too small. The gymnasium that's fractured, the location of all those things. So this plan fixes all those issues that we were hoping to be able to address in the design.
And
So-
that includes like line of sight safety issues,
Absolutely.
ADA issues, systems issues.
And drainage. Don't forget drainage. So again, that was the focus going in. So we knew we were going to be demolishing some buildings. We had some program funds for that new building construction. Right off the bat, we zeroed in on the media center as a great candidate for a replacement for the junior ROTC and CTE. And of course, we knew there were mandatory compliances. There's things you have to do campus-wide to make the entire campus work. The fire alarm's got to work everywhere, PA system's got to work everywhere, technology has to work everywhere. So we knew that going in. Subsequent to starting this, now that we've had the opportunity to have experts go in and look very deeply into all these different systems throughout the campus, we found there's a lot more scope that needs to be addressed. And those you can see the items like air conditioning, HVAC, envelope repairs. We had some very detailed analysis. We actually did some destructive testing on the existing buildings to see exactly what we were working with. Safety systems, technology, lighting, doors and hardware, we all took a harder look at, and we realized we've got some needs that really need to be looked at. So going to the next slide, you can see the budget numbers and where it says project budget. That's what we started off before we had a great deal of understanding of exactly what we were going to be able to do with the campus. And we factored that in on a larger footprint. And as we mentioned earlier, we thought we were looking at 180,000 square feet of new construction. And we factored that the most expensive that we'd ever spent doing new construction, that's the number that we used. And we actually allowed some program reserve, project reserve in there as well for future escalation. The challenge is, all that's been overrun by the reality of where we are today with the costs increase that we've seen across the board in virtually every division of work. So now that we've gotten the designs to a point where we can take a really hard look at them, and we're getting ready to take an even harder look now that we have the design, the 60% designs that are a little bit more detailed, we can get even more accurate costing. But based upon the 30% design, we're way short really across the board. Site development costs, new construction, renovation. So it's basically taken on most of our project reserves, and that still won't get us where we need to be to tackle all these other issues that we feel are very, very much needed.
And we've been able to lessen that delta, as Mr. Lockard mentioned, by the right sizing of the square footage. So that is something that did help our case to close the gap on our budget deficiency.
And the fact that we had over $7 million in reserve to hopefully absorb any escalations that we would have or scope items that we hadn't factored in. And again, the challenge is that we still have quite a ways to go to get all that covered.
And this doesn't include the road either, right?
This does not include the connector road. That is a portion that would be funded by Osceola County. We're simply providing the provisions for that to connect up at a later date, whenever that may be.
But we are using that same curb cut, so they wouldn't have to go in and recreate that.
Okay, so with that, we're now going to take a deeper dive into these various components.
Right.
And we'll turn it back over to Mike.
So because we are over in our budget, the next slide and the subsequent slides are intended to give you a little bit more transparency and an option, if you would, into what we are spending the project money on. So there's a bar graph or stacked graph that shows how the costs add up. And on the left side, we have a table with the approximated values based on the categories. The items in black indicate items that kind of make up that critical mass of work that needs to be accomplished and is currently in the budget. The items in red, I'm going to go through in more detail, but also are currently more than our projected or budget allows. So I'll go through the next couple slides rather quickly just to explain what each category contains. So the first one is area renovations. This, the major component of this is the exterior walkways for the new construction and for the rest of the site, and to replace the tennis courts that will be displaced by the renovated staff parking and bus loop. Mandatory compliance, as the name kind of implies, it's small things that are needed to get the existing facilities up to code, with the major item being getting a restroom update to our spaces to meet our fixture counts. But it also includes smaller items for emergency egress lighting and fire alarm, another large ticket item. So the next one is expanded scope under the HVAC, which follows the facility assessment provided to us by maintenance. It is there's more being called out to be replaced now than at project conception. So we will be replacing a good number of air handling units and VAVs, and those systems will also require additional controls. Envelope repairs, Mark touched on this before, but we have a provision for replacing approximately 20% of the existing windows, and the other 80% will have a treatment, a wet seal treatment, and we'll also be doing some amount of roof repairs, especially on building 7. Technology, and in specific network technology. This is an ask to reallocate space in the existing buildings, which mostly is cabinets and closets right now, to be dedicated IDF spaces. The major part of that is that it will have dedicated HVAC. Even if the school HVAC is running, those rooms will remain cool, which is preferred for that electrical equipment. Cosmetic improvements, Jessica touched on this. This includes some amount of stucco patching, pressure washing, exterior painting, and interior painting as required for the facility. Lighting, this is just a replacement of existing light fixtures with the new LED style fixtures that we use in new construction. And then doors and hardware, that is allowance for replacement of interior and exterior doors as needed and the hardware associated with them. And that kind of covers each individual category that makes up our total scope right now. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over.
Okay, well, thank you, Mike, for that deep dive. So as the team has summarized, there are additional components that have come to fruition as we work through the program verification, schematic design, working very closely with the stakeholders, doing what is correct for the project, but not going overboard with our scope and our costs. The minimal scope items that we believe are necessary to provide adequate facilities for education and teaching at Gateway High School. So this is the point in time where we're requesting guidance for these additional scope items. We're recommending increasing the project budget from 78 to 85.3 million, an additional $7.3 million to address these additional scope items and the escalation that has been running rampant through the market. And we do have Pearl, our construction manager, that hasn't been involved in our cost estimating exercises. They are available to answer any questions as well.
Mr. Melendez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I like everything that's been happening so far, but I just have to, there's that oversight part of me that has to kind of look at things, especially when you're asking for a scope change. And I understand construction to a certain degree. Like, if you open up a wall, you don't know what's inside there, there's some unforeseen circumstances. When I look at some of these things here that says envelope repairs and HVAC, cosmetic repairs, to me, that's not like unseen. Like, why wasn't this in the original scope of when to do work? Because when you're asking for additional money beyond what's approved, it's usually because something came up. I was expecting to say, hey, there's asbestos in the wall or something like that, because nobody can really see that. And then that's completely justifiable, unforeseen circumstances occur, but this just looks like the natural eye of somebody doing a cost estimation should have caught that during the original walkthrough or whatever they do to evaluate how much they should, estimate this project to be.
Right, so that's a great question, Mr. Melendez. Our initial budgeting exercise was completed prior to program verification and any investigation being completed. And it was based on the facility condition assessment information that we had at the time. So for example, with the HVAC and envelope, in working with our maintenance department stakeholder, they brought to our attention additional HVAC and envelope needs for this project. So that's what we additionally, those type of things that we factored in now.
And we did initially know, of course, that we were gonna have to do some work all around the campus on all of these divisions, which is why we had budgeted over $10 million to deal with the existing buildings. The additional scope and escalation has now ratcheted that up to over 15 million. The few things that were unknown were the exact extent of the HVAC issues, and we actually did extensive testing on the envelope to find out how many, were all the windows okay? No, some of them aren't. That's the 20% is that we have to deal with. That was only verified after we did the testing. We didn't have the ability to do that before we started the project when we had established the budget. Same thing with the roofs. We actually did detailed testing on the roofs. We did destructive testing on walls and window systems. One of the things that's bothered this campus since it was built is water intrusion. And you can see there's actually flumes built all over the campus to channelize the water because it is in such a low-lying area. Bass Slough runs right next to the campus. So all these things have to be dealt with in some manner. And again, we actually custodied all the buildings. We did the evaluation on all the buildings, submitted that to DOE, and until we found out exactly which buildings would be coming down, that led to a closer number on what was going to be new construction. It might have been that we were only given a few buildings, maybe 2. Then the new construction number would be tiny, and we'd have plenty of money for all that renovation that we're doing. So there's some give and take with trying to establish these budgets. And we got sticker shock, believe me, it was much or more than you. It's in every single project that we're doing, even the small little projects, we're having to put escalation numbers that are boggling our minds just to keep up with the escalation that we're seeing naturally. I mean, especially commodities such as steel, 30-40% increases, HVAC equipment, the same
And
lines.
it's just material, that's not resources, additional cost for resources that we're now seeing in the market.
Which there has been a noted increase. No, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Arroyo?
Mr. Clinch, have we done an assessment as to whether or not our own internal maintenance teams can do some of this work? And I'm not thinking anything construction related, but like the painting, for example, is something like, as opposed to Pirtle doing it. Do we know if it would be cheaper or more expensive? Or?
Yeah, it's possible that the maintenance department could do that work at a later date. We've had experience where we've looked at different scenarios, outsourcing the work or having maintenance do it. And in several instances, we've found that it is less costly for our maintenance department to do it. But the rationale, when we have forces that are mobilized there, that is the time to do it. But to your point, yes, some of this work could be deferred to a later date. And as long as everyone understands that when we walk away from this project, it's not gonna, everything completed.
But all the mandatories, all the life safety, all that would have to be dealt with within the
Absolutely.
project.
That is a non-negotiable.
And I completely, I'm very familiar with the construction industry, the process, and you hate to split these things up, and then you have mismatched, whatever. It's like having brand loyalty, right? And what about putting it out to bid? Some of these different items that involve putting them back out to bid, as opposed to just having Pirtle them swallow it.
Well, at this point in time, we have not gone out to bid. We're scheduled to go out to bid. Our bid opening is January 20th. So ultimately on bid day, it's what the market will bear. And that's when we're gonna have a true picture of what our costs are going to be. At this point in time, these cost estimates are based on our current design development, our 60% documents.
Yeah.
That could fluctuate a little bit. This is a really hard market to gauge what is gonna happen in the future. And I wish I could exactly gauge what the market's gonna do. I'd be a rich man. But, there are so many variables with the current COVID slide and other issues that, resource issues. But based on the current DDs, this is, our best estimate at this time. We have factored in some project reserves. And additionally, regarding the maintenance availability, another thing that we've looked at in determining if we should have maintenance do the work or if we should outsource is their availability. And, in the summertime, our maintenance department is stretched very thin. They're trying to catch up on various maintenance activities across our district. So we would have to look at the timing of that as well.
Yes, and we've just gotten our commissioning agent on board, Hanson, and they do both envelope commissioning and HVAC commissioning. So they're gonna go out and be another set of eyes for us and drill down even deeper to see what the trade-offs would be on saving some systems that might have 5-10 years life left in them, if they're saved. Spend a little bit of money on them, changing filters, coils, minimal effort versus just wholesale replacement.
Yeah.
Obviously, in a perfect world, when you truly do a comprehensive renovation of a school, you'd like to bring everything back to zero. Well, we said up front we weren't gonna do that because we've got some really old buildings that are not particularly well built. They don't have good bones, as we say, but we have to keep them. So we don't wanna do too much to them. So in years down the road, we're stuck with them. So that's something else that we have to
And
factor
the
in.
existing buildings have a lot of life left to them. But it's not, where we can say
Another 50
all of them
years.
have 10 years left. It's varying depending on the life that is left in the systems of those buildings. And some HVAC equipment may have 5 years, roofs may have another 8 years. So why would we replace that roof with a new 12 to 15-year roof when the roof has another 8 years of life? So we're trying to be fiscally responsible as we move through this process.
I gotcha. And really the point of those two questions was to let Pirtle know that we're looking at the costs, right? So Pirtle, take care of us.
They will have several outreach opportunities, and the great thing about using a large firm like Pirtle, they've got a lot to draw from. They attract a lot of subs, and that's how you keep your prices down. The more competition that you can get, if we try to bid something out, we might get 2 or 3 bids, they might get 7 or 8. And when everybody knows there's that kind of competition, they're gonna be sharpening their pencils, they're gonna be giving you, their best price for, the conditions that we're working in.
Hopefully they're from here.
Well, and that too, part of the outreach is to target local participation. We'll do a minimum of 2 outreach events.
But it also ties back to my original concern was the scope creep. At what point do we say, okay, we found everything, because then unforeseen circumstances will still occur. Because I see that no matter what, no matter how much you plan, you're always gonna see something. I don't want it to look like these are things that, we just kind of chose, we're gonna go this direction or that direction. At some point, we have to say, okay, we hit the finish line as far as design phase is going. We're no more designing, we know what we want to build, and let's go ahead and move
Right.
towards that.
And scope creep comes in 2 different varieties. There's the additional scope that's required from that unforeseen condition, to your example, opening up a wall and finding something that has to be corrected. But scope creep can also come from stakeholders wanting more than that minimum requirement that they really need. And we have dealt with some of that with working with our stakeholders and working with our stakeholders to determine what is really, what's the want and what's the need, and addressing the need and nothing above and beyond that. And our stakeholders have been very helpful in getting us to right size our square footage and our programs as well.
Mr. Mass, you're next.
Okay, hey Mark, is there any savings with the shape of the building? I mean, a 10 by 10 square and a 20 by 5 rectangle are both 100 square feet, but it's 10 extra feet to build a rectangle than it is to build a square. I mean, I noticed a lot of these buildings have a lot of kick-ins, kick-outs, but I mean, is there any savings just looking at the shape of the new construction?
Yeah, the savings is from having just 2 new buildings. One new building is just the kitchen cafeteria, the other new building is everything else. So you're getting common walls, your structure is reduced to absolute minimum. And that's why you see some of these kickouts that you're identifying is we've put all these different things together now under literally one roof. And that does minimize your cost, and that's why we were able to shrink the square footage. Instead of having isolated separate buildings, we've put them together, and that did shrink the footprint significantly from 180,000 to 155,000.
I just know when you're building a house, any turn or any corner that
Oh,
you
yes,
make, it adds the price, so I
Yeah.
just seen if there was any trimming on the new side.
It's also worth mentioning that there's some pretty high elevations that you don't really see on the top-down view, but remember, like, especially in that first main building, there's a gymnasium,
Right.
and that kickoff on the side is ESC. So those are completely different elevations
I gotcha, okay.
so it's not gonna be of benefit to try to put it all together, because then I'd have quite a lot of, then I probably wouldn't have my three-story building.
Gotcha, I understand, just.
And that's the other
just a lot of
challenge, is that a lot of what we're providing in new construction is high-cost core space. You've got the gymnasium,
Gymnasium, kitchen,
performing arts,
cafeteria.
kitchen, cafeteria, arts and music, very high-cost areas, whereas most of the classroom buildings are the buildings that we're keeping.
And how's our principal feel about it? What do you think about the design?
I love the design.
Any input? Because it's gonna be your home.
Well, no, we've talked extensively
Yes.
Good.
about a lot of the things, and I think that I've maintained pretty much from the start that there's a lot of pride in our community.
Absolutely.
And the place that you find that's missing is like pride in the building. You know, it's just kind of there, it doesn't feel like or look like a natural high school would, and I think that's the one piece that we're missing. And when I saw those conceptions, it was like,
Looks
I had
great.
to immediately take pictures and send it to my team, because I mean, it's super exciting to see that. But I mean, part of that community and that pride and that feel is, you know, to be able to walk into a state-of-the-art performing arts center that you can actually perform in, that is ADA compatible, that has some acoustics and lights and wiring and sound that work, and a gymnasium that is not like this little tiny thing where you're on top of everybody and you can feel, you know, you can have like the proper excitement that's part of being in a comprehensive high school.
I'll get the template for you for the cat print, the paw prints that we can paint in the sidewalk for you, okay?
A
You're
natural
okay with that?
parking lot too, that's not grass.
No,
Yes, it'll be a paved parking lot, new light fixtures, and with the courtyard, there's chance to alleviate some of the flooding that happens by just not having, by having that green space. There's quite a lot of water intrusion, and that's, without demoing everything and raising it up, that's probably our best solution to help with that issue, so.
and Principal Long's, him and his whole staff have been so accommodating to our team. And that has, to Mr. Melendez's issue, that has helped us gain so much understanding of what's in those buildings. The team went to maintenance and rummaged through everything that they had and pieced together things that maintenance didn't even know that we had, and scanned it all and provided all that back to us. So now we get to reap the benefit of having all these nice scanned drawings, when before we just had rolled up paper shoved in the corner someplace. So we do have a very robust understanding of all the systems at the school. And again, that's a testament of how closely the school staff has worked with us. We've had innumerable site visits from specialists, from engineers, going above ceilings and just crawl spaces and.
And I'll just add on the rectangle, just for my architectural side of things, we did 7 iterations of this plan. And yes, we did plot down a rectangle in one of those iterations, and we did evaluate it. We're navigating existing buildings. And so when you do actually, counter to what you might think, when you put a large rectangle on the site, we end up having to do more site work and more phasing to the project, which adds the cost in a different way versus putting that value into your actual project. So even swinging tilt up and some of those things gets harder on those rectangles, and you end up shutting down more of your site and elongating your schedule, which is money that isn't realized in the actual build
Oh,
form.
I agree, that's why I
So
was,
all of those things, just so that you know, as part of this intensive process, we went through all of that to look at it and understand why we were going in the direction that we were going, so that I could answer a question like that and tell you, yes, typically a rectangle is cheaper on a greenfield site, but when you look at the complexities of an occupied site, when you're navigating existing buildings and site logistics and all of the other costs on those things, this building is actually the most efficient building programmatically for those functions. and from the standpoint of making sure we can break down those areas and not put cost towards firewalls and some of those other things that again are not great value for you guys to spend money on, if we can pick that up in a different way.
And again, just the fact that we're having to do so much phasing is an expense. It's an enormous expense. We are having as many as 7 phases to this project right now, and we'll split those up into sub-phases. So by the end of the day, there'll be, a dozen or more. And every time you do that, that's additional fencing, additional security. You're changing something. You're changing the flow of traffic. You're changing the flow of pedestrian traffic. You're changing how teachers get to work, how staff, is able to access the different areas. All that has to be factored in, and it all costs money. So, yeah, we'd love to have a greenfield site where we just go and build the building and leave, but this is gonna be a challenge.
I think,
Just a real quick question, because this has been a pet peeve of mine since I was even beginning to run. Many of our courtyards in our schools they're barren and they're hot. I don't know how else to put it. Can we incorporate landscaping, trees? Is that part of this plan? Because I know
Yes.
when you look at Harmony and Toho and all these other.
Short answer is yes.
Okay.
Yes, we have a great
Good
landscape
answer. Short
architect that's
script.
looking at really efficient.
Sorry,
buildable
thank you. I didn't mean to take.
No,
I
you're fine. You
We
can
have
ask my
a
question.
drawing we could give you today.
Just get our answers.
And with this plan, we actually get a courtyard that's of a suitable size for high school activities, pep rallies, et cetera. Today, the school doesn't have that. There's little micro courtyards with lots of line of sight issues. So when we remove those buildings that have been approved by DOE, it gives us that ability to provide that courtyard and to incorporate the green space that Mike was talking about with trees
Yeah.
and shade.
Great,
Yeah,
thank you.
and eliminate the need for stormwater investment elsewhere because we're gonna use the courtyard for that space.
Gotcha, okay.
I've got a quick question to go to you, Dr. Bates. And I don't think you'll have the answer now, but I'd like it at some point. I'm assuming now that we've gone from $10 to $15 million in renovations, you've made sure that we're not gonna spend $4 million on a building that we can tear down and rebuild for $3 million, right? Let's just make very sure.
Great point, and that's why we're minimizing the extent of renovations. Because if we do that, if we put a substantial investment in an existing building,
Right.
it prohibits us.
I understand all that completely. That's what concerns me about going from $10 million to $15 million.
Right.
Are we doing that or do we need to build another building next to it or incorporate?
Right now,
I don't need the
buildings-
answer now, just
Buildings
please.
16 and 17, we aren't putting any money in those buildings at all other than to put fire alarm in them. The minimum life safety.
With the expectation that we're gonna get the Castaldi approval for those 2 additional buildings and be able to raise those and get those out of the way, because they're not needed. All that programming is incorporated into the new construction for art and music.
Dr. Pace?
I just want to assure the board, we have met over this and had several hard conversations because I had a heart attack when they originally told me about the budget increase that we were proposing to recommend today. I've really looked at it deeply. It's not about program scope as much as it is renovation scope, that if we don't do it now, a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we're gonna be going back into these same buildings and having to invest these types of money at potentially more expense. So I totally hear you, I understand, and we are not saying to Pearl, you have $85 million to build this building. We are saying we expect a very extensive vendor outreach and extensive push for local vendors as much as we possibly can so that we have a competitive price to bring back to you after the first of the year when those bids are opened.
It is a little bit like deja vu all over again. This is about our 3rd one where
I know,
we've
it's-
been through everything. The board's been very strong about what they wanted or not wanted to spend. And we come back for another $7 million.
I would not be afraid to shorten that center right field where it's impeding on the road so that the Panthers can hit a few more home runs.
I'm opposed to that.
Chairman, in favor of that.
Mr. Krabbenbach, you had a comment before we move to elementary act?
In terms of your comment that you guys made about engaging, at least 2 engagements with the public to try and get local, could I make a recommendation, you review that plan with the superintendent and it be reviewed with the board? Because that is going to be, in essence, an external communication from the board. And I think given prior thoughts by the board, we ought to know what's going to be happening and have the ability to give input
Make more sense to do it up front than
Yes.
have a controversy, and
That's a great recommendation.
there's some
Thank you,
strong
sir.
feelings on that.
Since it's 10 to 5 and we have celebration and also
Yes.
property discussion.
All right, we'll keep moving. Okay, thank you, team.
Thank you.
We're now gonna move
Thank
to
you.
our next project update for Elementary A, Celebration Island. I'm gonna ask Mr. Dave Torbert and Joe Toth to join us at the table from Schenkel Schultz Architects. Thank you, gentlemen, we appreciate you being here. And Mr. Torbert, let me go ahead and turn it over to you so we can talk about our site plan.
Okay, I'm gonna be really efficient, I'm told I'm on the clock, so. This first slide you can see, as many of y'all know, we designed the Celebration Isles Elementary School. It got put on hold for a variety of different reasons, and then this most recent iteration has included the school district acquiring or getting some additional land from the developer to kind of allow for things to be spaced out a little bit. So that's what's represented on the site plan that you see on the screen. You can see the statistics there about how many parking spaces, visitor parking, bus loop stacking, as well as the car stacking that's on the campus. And you'll note also that there's very adequate amount of room for all the play spaces, all the amenities that would go along with any normal elementary school. So that's a very quick overview of the site plan. If we go to the next slide, just talk a little bit about the schedule. You can see on here that we're in the process of working through picking up those old documents, updating them to the current standards, current building code, and making some of those changes, as well as redesigning the site. That's projected to be completed by the end of this year, at which time we'll move into the bidding and permitting phase, targeting a early May of next year construction start, which will have the construction completing in April, May of 2023, and that will allow for a full 3.5 months for the school district to move in and use the new facility. So.
And what that allows us to do is get ahead of the other school districts with FF&E, so that we can ensure we have that smooth landing and opening for our students in the fall of '23.
And bidding.
And yes.
Can somebody look at the 3 elementaries on this side of St. Cloud and give me some information on comparability of size and how many cars they have in stacking? Yeah, I just don't know what 170 cars means in comparison to number of pupils. And if you go over here to Neptune or to it's Budinger, you can't go down budget or if you're going to the hospital when school starts and ends. So I'm hoping 170 is 5 times as much as they have, but I don't know what it means.
Well, I mean, it's going to work out. I mean, the school is planned for about 930 students to attend it. So that's, in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% of the overall student capacity, which is a very normal planning figure that we utilize with a lot of our elementary schools to provide stacking. But Mark, I'm guessing that we can.
I guess my concern is, I don't know when you say what normal schools can do for stacking, we haven't done a very good job in a lot of the schools that we have.
Well, initially, we envisioned having a higher bus load, because we'll be bringing basically relief kids into the space. As they develop, the Celebration Island Village, there's 4 different, phases to it. We're only gonna have the first phase when we're building this. So initially, there'll be a relatively low volume of cars that will increase over time. But we need to make sure that we factor in for that, increase.
So we don't need another celebration.
We do not, and the team is very cognizant of that.
Okay. And I don't know what their if their stacking is 170, this is not enough.
One question on
We got to do it.
Celebration has no stacking.
That's all right, Julius.
That's good. Yeah, and there's like an upside down field goal post there at the bottom. What is that area for? There's like parking there?
That's actually not, the upside down field goal post is actually part of the development. Those are part of the development. They're not part of the school site. So those are alleyways between homes that will be built on that parcel there.
Oh, see, that's interesting. I'd like to see maybe not another overlay where it's just a school, because that's what he's talking about. See, I was thinking that's part of the stacking. And if that's somebody's house, that ain't gonna be some stacking issues, because that's somebody's house.
That's not the stacking area. The stacking area comes down from the north, and it goes all the way along I-4 there, and then turns around into Bell Loop, and it comes all the way back up and drops off at the school.
Yeah, the main entrance is here,
The stacking comes all the way along this route here and then drops off along the back of the school at this point. So this is all residential development. The black dashed line that you see on the site plan is actually the property line of the school property.
Man, that close.
It is
And
a
give us a
very
no
tight
buffer?
site.
I'm like, Lord, you're talking about security purposes. I'm like, you got like, are those houses already platted or they already built or is there?
Yes.
Yes,
Can we like,
There is
They're in construction.
there's a small green space
who the
right
heck
next to the
just,
school. That's the.
This school had a bunch of issues with gas pipelines and some other things, so it was,
all right, never mind, I defer to the
It's
10 member.
10 net acres. The good news is the development is taking our stormwater on, so we did not have to include a stormwater retention pond or the associated maintenance of that pond and permitting.
So is that, so I guess the north side, is it coming from Celebration High School to get there? Cause I'm looking at the overall
Yes,
map, it's
yes.
like trees, unless are they gonna come straight from I-4?
And the roundabout is, you
That is
can, you
I-4.
just continue right through the roundabout, and there's a bridge over Reedy Creek. And you get over the bridge, and then that takes you right to this, actually, you come right by the school before you get into most of the development.
And that was one of our previous delays. The bridge hadn't been built yet. The bridge is now completed and operational.
Juice,
Yeah,
Mr. Steele?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is more of a comment than a question for our district team. I heard you mention that you're expecting, and help me, I may have interpreted incorrectly, but something about we're expecting to be busing more people in versus having more people parking. Did I understand that correctly?
So as the density of the development increases, the thought process is you're going to have more walkers and less car stacking.
Okay,
We have a real good thing to
Yeah.
compare to with Celebration.
They're not walking.
that's
There'll
fine,
be more students that are more than 2 miles away when we open the school,
right.
so
But that's not gonna last.
So what is that?
that's not gonna last, exactly.
Okay, what does that mean? And I'm asking for specific reasons because this specific area has a serious problem with buses in general, specifically tardiness, not showing up, things like that. I know that's a huge problem in general, so I want us to start thinking about that as in an operational sense. The fact that I don't know that our bus situation is gonna get better ever, right? So I guess my question is, in general, not just for this school, but in general, when we're building, are we thinking about the fact that we have a serious bus situation when we're building these schools? I don't know that we're gonna have a better bus situation anytime soon. So is that something that's going into the thought process of how we are planning for schools?
Transportation West.
Yeah, so we actually worked in collaboration with our transportation department. They gave us, estimated bus counts based on the redistricting that will occur prior to the school opening. And we have provided adequate stacking for the buses as well. In fact, that bus loop is probably just a little bit bigger than what we typically do, would you say, Schultz?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tad bit bigger.
And I know the car stacking is certainly more
Considerably
than
more
what we have
than
previously
you all in the
done.
past.
And you can see, we took every single, square foot that we could to extend that on-site car stacking to the extent possible.
Okay, let me ask the question in a different way, because I think I may have gotten a little bit convoluted. My concern is that at some point, there's gonna be more parents dropping off their children than using the buses, because we do not have the ability to provide buses for everyone. That's a fact, right? So I'm not like, it's no one's fault, it's just the way it is. So that's really where my question is centered around.
And to that point,
Yeah.
we have provided additional on-site car stacking than what we typically do.
Okay,
You can see, and Dave, if you
Yeah.
want to get up again and point that out.
Yeah, I mean, look, typically in the past, for a lot of schools are designed to where the parent drop off would just happen through the parking area. In this case, what we've done is we've purposely built a car drop loop, an additional loop that extends the entire length of the property
Okay.
to really give you that stacking length this way and then all the way back around, so it's not just limited to the parking lot.
Perfect.
So, I mean, I think if you compare, and I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head, but I think if you compare this to a lot of your previous schools, you'll find that this amount of stacking is a considerable amount more for the cars than what you probably do or have done on a lot of your previous schools.
Thank you. If you explained that earlier and I just didn't put two and two
I
together,
mean, it's a very
thank
valid
you so
question.
much. But that's really something we're gonna have to, I think we may have to start thinking about going forward with every school that we're building.
You're absolutely
I
right.
just don't think that we are going to be a bus. That's just a thing of the past, I think. So thank you so much for explaining that.
Yeah, I hate to,
To Chairman Thacker's point, we'll provide that comparison for
Great,
other schools,
thank you.
just so we can show the percentage that we've been able to improve.
Ms. Melinda, you're up.
yeah, I hate to beat a dead horse, because maybe we could talk about this offline, but I'm not seeing the same thing. Google Maps might be lying to me, but where, where Coastal Drive and in between, it shows the school. And here, there is no school. There's like a road in between, and it looks like there's a bunch of houses in there. So where exactly is the
That's all
school gonna
being,
go?
that's all being redone because the
So did we take that
developer,
over? Did we buy that? Did we do like eminent domain or something? Because it looks like they built the road.
the
and then they put
developer
houses
kept
in
on
between there.
building.
Originally, the piece of property that was for this school cut across approximately
Yes.
there. And so the school district and the developer worked out an arrangement in which the school board is getting this piece of property, which I believe, Mark, you correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was already platted and was originally gonna be homes. But that has now changed and that the school board has this piece of property now in addition to the property they had before.
And
Because
part
it
of
looks
this
like here they
project will
put
be-
down asphalt, so there's like
Yeah,
utilities,
yeah.
so we have to like dig under the ground and take those
We're gonna
utilities
have
out
to
and
remove
everything?
the asphalt,
Do we have to
alleys,
pay for that?
and the utilities, yes. Yes, that's on us. Now, the developer,
Somebody needs to
we routed
explain
some of
to
the
you
utilities,
offline
which was part of
all the
our,
background of why the school got moved and what was done there.
Yeah, yeah, we'll do that offline for time, yeah.
There was a big issue.
okay, are there any other questions
Yeah,
for
Mr.
Celebration
O'Brien,
Island?
question.
So this is, the issue really is site selection, right? Because you're packed to the gills here in this, what you're building in this property line, within the property line. So it's really about site selection and forward planning more than it is about, I mean, it looks like you're building the best school that you can, right? And this is the land that we have. And we're building it right on top of other houses and there's all, it's happening, right? The developing it. So it's really about looking into the future and finding out what we need in the future and then planning for what's gonna be there at that point in time, not what's there yesterday, right? So, yeah, this is not a great scenario. I already hear the complaints that these houses are gonna have about that school, So, I mean, it's just, but it is what it is. So it looks like you guys.
Is there a code that you can't build higher than 2 stories? Can you build like a 4-story or 5-story building?
With elementary school, your challenge is because of the primary grades have to be on the bottom floor. But you can do 3 stories, like for example, that's what we've done at Liberty, that's what we've done at Tohoku-Kalaiga, and our new prototypes have some 3-story buildings, but you always have to be careful, especially in an elementary or a K-8, about how that falls out.
And the costs are a lot more.
Well, it's difficult to compact in a 4-story on an elementary school because in addition to the grade levels, kindergarten and first grade having to be on the first floor, all the core facilities have to be on the first floor because they have to have access to it. So you wind up with a big long footprint anyway and just one piece that can go vertical. You don't have that situation in middle and high schools.
I do think you all bring up a very valid point about site selection, and the backstory on the Celebration Isle property is one that we certainly can have offline. It is one that from the very beginning was a difficult setting at a different site, and we've been through a lot of negotiations to get us to where we are today. Because when the site deal was originally made, the grid wasn't built, and so nobody could see it. We've learned a lot since then, and that's why this site is very, very tight. But I will tell you that Schultz has really been an incredible partner in that negotiation process with the developer to make this site work for an elementary school setting in a very tight space, but we'll certainly come back to all those conversations. Speaking of land though, there is a handout at each of your seats that we did not put on the agenda for the workshop because it was a late developing item of potential conversation. And that is, as we are starting to look at numbers with Rhonda and her team and the amount of development that is continuing to come forward on both the east and the west side of the county, while your current capital plan does not have a high school in the 10-year plan, it's looking like after the first of the year, we'll be coming back to you to say, we may need a high school or we may potentially need two on both the east and the west. And as you know, we do have a site now on the east that's already been invested in by the district with the Nova Road property, the Newman Road property. We've just learned of a potential site on the west side that I'm gonna have Mark and Rhonda and the team share a little bit more information with you. We're not looking for action, we're just looking for a head nod as to whether or not you want us to continue to look at this for down the road as a way of banking a more suitable site than anything we've been able to find, or not. So Mark and Rhonda?
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon.
Ms. Brown?
It is a portion of the property, yes. So this is a 75 acre, the aerial is just a rough, it's not precise at this point, it was just to help everybody get their bearings. The cross street to the south is Orange Brown Road, so that helps you get your bearings. And then the little building that has been circled around, that's actually the fire department when you're coming along the boulevard. Excuse me. So this is 75 acres. It's owned by a generational ranching family that's been primarily used for cattle production. It's about 1.5 miles from 192 and it's 5 miles from the entrance to Disney. The overall property itself is in the short-term rental layer identified by Osceola County, and it's approximately 1,200 feet on Poinciana Boulevard. Excuse me. So from a planning services aspect, you've been hearing this for a while, that single parcels of 50 plus acres on the western side of Osceola County are very scarce. Even trying to do multiple assemblages are becoming difficult because you start dealing with your multiple owners and it just becomes really complicated. So we have been and we continue to search to secure land for not only educational purposes but for ancillary purposes on the west side of the county. And we've been doing that for at least 11 years, if not longer, based on some documentation that I can find in the files of the office. Due to availability and or appraised value prices for the west side of the county, mostly commercial tourist, typically property is priced above appraisal and outside of our range. So we typically are not able to move forward with any of the opportunities we've had in the past. Currently on the west side of town, we are still trying to move forward with Transportation West and also a school site south of this property for a K-8 site that we hope to be closing on by March. In addition, on the west side of the county, we do need a high school site as well as another K-8 site, because since we've gone into negotiations for the K-8 on the Knightsbridge site, we've been told that immediately south of that, Osceola County is doing its master sunrow plan. There'll be about 4,000 multifamily affordable housing. So that will basically take all of the seats in the Knightsbridge school. And so therefore the relief school that we were building Knightsbridge for West Side now becomes another need. So we now are in need of another K-8 on the west side of the county. Currently the two high schools that serve this area are Celebration High School and Poinciana High School. Celebration High School is full. It can only accommodate 4 portables. It has for some time. The Celebration community has, the TCC and the CROA have continued to allow those portables there, even though they should not be there. Celebration itself has been redistricted twice in the past 5 years, with all of those students, except for about 100, being redistricted to Poinciana High School. And that is what drove the 2 classroom wing additions in the past 5 years to Poinciana High School.
And we did a space reconfiguration at Celebration High School as well.
Yes, that was back in 2010 and I think 2015. We did 2 of those. Currently, Celebration High School can hold roughly 2,656 students without any portables. Its ideal size is about 2,522, so that would mean no teachers on a cart. We've taken into consideration students don't show up in the perfect number by grade by classroom. So at this point, they're probably about 200 students over the perfect situation that they are managing, but we do need to be looking at a pretty immediate relief for them. They also house the IB program for the west side of the county. Poinciana High School, after its 2 classroom wing additions, can now accommodate 2,719 students without its portables. It currently has 6 portables on its campus. Their enrollment as of October was 2,471, and their ideal size would also be about 2,583. So they're coming up fast and furious on their overall capacity. They also host the Business Academy for the district as a whole. What the staff was hoping for would be to get a consensus to move forward to do some due diligence on this property. The current practice that we operate under is we must be in a purchase and sell agreement with the owner, and that is the trigger that allows us to move forward with the appraisals. And then if everybody agrees on the appraised value, from there we get a 180-day due diligence. So that's kind of where staff is at today. We're hoping that you'll take this into consideration and let us at least move forward with a purchase and sell agreement to get the appraisals. Long term, I just do not believe that we can go wrong with this property. A high school, a K-8, definitely it's just property that's needed on a portion of the county that's almost impossible to find. Since I've been in the district in the last, at least since about 2004, before being in the planning department, we were trying to secure property along the boulevard, and it's just something we've never been capable of doing until now.
Got several questions for you. I've got a quick one for you, just to think about, and I don't know anything about real estate, so.
Okay.
But could this whole square, rectangle, whatever it is, be moved west and get us off the frontage? Would that save us anything if we left a sizable, I know we'd have to have a flag or whatever you call it to get to the road.
Actually, the property behind, to the west of that is gonna be, in the.
Looks like wet.
Oh, is it? Okay, it didn't look that wet in the,
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's a sliver.
I see the little swamp.
And then it goes in the.
Okay, never mind. Mr. Arguello, then Ms. Castillo, then Mr. Melendez.
What are they asking for this?
So they have not, unlike when we did our last 2 green sites where the owners had a set price in mind, this family does not have a set price in mind, and they're willing to look at it from the appraisal angle. So we would get an appraisal, they would get an appraisal. If they're within 10%, we do the average. If they're not within 10%, we agree on a third appraiser, and then the 2 highest are then averaged out to determine the price of the property.
I've hunted deer here. It's sad to put a school on this land.
We do anticipate it won't be cheap.
Yeah.
But nothing out there is. And the concern is if we continue to wait for a more suitable site, the price is just continuing to escalate.
And we did also ask about coming down a little more to the south, but the 4 corners of Oren Brown and Poinciana Boulevard, those are actually zoned for commercial. So we would not want to get down into those pieces because they will definitely have a price tag that we're not looking to purchase on. So we're not.
Ms. Castillo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rhonda, do we have a timeline for when the need will actually arise for a new high school?
Yes, ma'am. Right now, the department is doing what we call our annual review of all track development. It's typically done just before the holidays, and then we have our numbers by mid-January. But based off of the growth we saw this year, which was in addition to the traditional growth we've seen, we are starting to think that the east and the west are running neck to neck, which is why Dr. Pace is saying we now see 2 high schools, definitely one within the 10-year window. The other one, if not inside of the 10-year, at least under construction and opening just outside of the 10-year window, and possibly not building them at the full 2,500 prototype, but maybe bringing them in at 1,800, but having the design of the ghost wings for future grow out. that we're seeing that need, because I mean, obviously Harmony and St. Cloud High are in this bind, and then Celebration, OHS, and Poinciana, so we're really starting to see them run neck to neck.
And my second question is more for Dr. Pace. I know that we're trying to have all of our schools have like a specialty, some kind of program that they're known for. Do we know what's like on deck? I know hospitality has been something that we just, maybe I've discussed it in my head, not with you, but is that do we know like what's the next, I guess, career path that we see growing in our district that we might be able to partner with some businesses on?
Hospitality management is a concept that we have been like floating around, particularly because on the west side, there's so much need and demand in terms of jobs for those types of fields. But it's something that we certainly would have further discussion before we moved into a design phase, taking into account as well that there's now an annual review process of high demand, high wage jobs across our state and in our region that determine what the state will approve funding for. In terms of CTE growth and development. So those would be further conversations with the board, with the community, and with our CTE staff about what would be next.
So with that in mind, thank you for reminding me about it because I totally forgot. If this isn't set to be needed for 10 years, like what's the soonest? No, I guess the latest that we would be able to determine what kind of program we should house there. Understand that there's like annual review and all of that.
Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but for a typical high school design, it's about a year, year and a half in design, and then a year, year and a half, 2 years in construction, correct?
It's running more like 14 months because of the Army Corps permitting that would be associated with this site. And then we're looking at about 22 months for a new high school construction.
So I would say year 4, year 5, we would be having those serious discussions about which direction the board wanted to go. But it's an ongoing discussion that we'll have with our strategic planning process every year.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much.
Ms. Melendez?
All right, I'll try to be quick. Well, first of all, I actually knew about it. Thank the Lord. And like, so Rhonda, we spoke about it comprehensively, so I appreciate not being blindsided. Number 2, worst case scenario, if the west transportation doesn't go through, because we have to get easements and, there's so many conditions for it to go through, can this be an alternate site selection for the west side transportation?
We've talked about that internally. I would have to reach back out to the owner representative to see if we could bump it up a few acres. Right now, we're looking at around 45 to 50 acres for transportation, and then you also need about 50 acres for the high school prototype. So we would probably need a few extra acres, but we could have some inside staff see if we could put them both here. I do think the county would have a little heartburn for our transportation center to go here, but we could still, obviously I could sit down and have those discussions. I just couldn't prior to today because the owner wanted to see the feedback in general before we kind of went through the county and even let them know this became a possibility. So other than the county might push back on both of those being side to side in this particular location, I definitely could talk to the owner representative to see if there would be enough acreage to do both should the other.
Okay.
But right now, we still do think the other is going to come through.
Okay. I just want to think about it as a contingency plan just in case. And then the last thing is, I know you're talking about Army Corps of Engineers. I know a little history on this property. There were some issues possibly about environmental. We just need to be careful that when we submit something, that they clean it up 100% at their sole cost, and they're giving us a good site that's up and ready.
Yes.
That doesn't require any mitigation from us.
Yes.
And I do like the idea of banking the possibility, because again, we spoke about this before, we're gonna run out of space, period, so we need to get, it is forward thinking, worst case scenario, we don't build, but then we had it just in case, and I kinda like that possibility.
Board, anything else? Thank y'all very much. With that, we'll stand adjourned and reconvene in 10 minutes for our regularly scheduled meeting.